What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the latest episode of the Broken Skull Sessions featuring Jerry Lawler. Now, it's been a while since they've done an episode, Stone Cold and his guest. They haven't done one since the Mark Henry episode, which was way back when in late June. Now, that feels like it was like 2 weeks ago. I don't know about you guys, but it feels like time has flown since then. But we had Jerry Lawler on for the September 6th, 2020 episode. Yes, I am putting this up fairly late, about a week or so after the fact. There's just been a ton going on, ton of content going up right now on the WWE Network, and a ton more to come, too. In the days and weeks to come, I still have day ofs to review. I have a timeline to review, multiple timelines, actually. R-Truth Game Show finale, all that is coming here to the channel in the coming days. But yeah, I had a chance to finally sit down in the last few days and watch this Broken Skull Sessions. Clocks in at around an hour and 16 minutes, but you would never know. And I don't want to say I was skeptical going in. It's not that I don't like Jerry Lawler. He has a lot of great stories to share. My only issue with this was that I feel like I've heard him on the Steve Austin show before on Steve's podcast. Maybe it was a long time ago, right after he had the heart attack and whatever. I'm pretty sure it was. So maybe it's probably been long enough where it felt fresh again. He talked about all the obvious topics, the Andy Kaufman stuff. He actually didn't really get into the heart attack at all. You know, Steve at one point asked him, "Oh, how you doing?" And Jerry said, "Great," and that was about it. He actually said that he feels he's had 1,000 matches. Like, he seriously said that he thought he had 1,000 matches since the heart attack, which was obviously an exaggeration. That's not even possible. I mean, there's 350 days a year, 365 days in a year. That's like having a match every other day for the last 8 years. That's ridiculous. And the guy's 60-something years old, I think, if not 70. But at any rate, other than that, I thought this was a great episode. And even the stories I already heard about before, like the Andy Kaufman stuff and being on commentary with JR and stuff like that, I still thoroughly enjoyed. I never really... If I did hear a podcast with Jerry about his early start in the business, I just don't remember. So a lot of this felt fresh for me again, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Him and Steve have great chemistry, and they're really, really good together. So they start off the episode with Jerry mentioning that he's actually celebrating 50 years. Celebrating 50 years in the business in 2020. Having started in wrestling in August of 1970. And they talk more about his 50th year anniversary later on in the podcast. They talk about the current circumstances and him doing commentary actually the very beginning of the pandemic. He hasn't been on Raw commentary in a number of months, thankfully, for a number of reasons. One, it's just not really worth flying him down there for. And two, he's just not that good anymore. And I like Jerry, but in 2020, as the standard babyface commentator, I just don't give a shit about his commentary. It's just not good. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, and in the last couple of years when he was a heel, the Mauro Ranallo, there was a very brief period there on SmackDown. In the first half of the year in 2016, he was a great commentator. I thoroughly enjoyed Jerry and Mauro together. They were a very underrated duo. Other than that, though, he has been just boring to listen to for a number of years now. Despite that, he talks about the commentary process and how he first joined commentary and how it differs from 1993, 94 to 2020. And kind of on the subject of empty arenas and wrestling with no fans and doing commentary with no fans, they discussed the empty arena match that he had with Terry Funk, I believe in his own promotion, in April of 1981. So Jerry and Terry Funk were having a feud at that point, and Terry claimed that everyone in the building, whether it be the referee, the fans, everyone was in Jerry Lawler's back pocket. He wanted a match where there was no one else there, but I think him and Lance Russell, I believe. If it wasn't Lance, it was someone else. I forgot. Someone else came down to ringside at the end of the match. But he wanted no one in that arena but them three only. That was it. No one else in the arena. So he said that everything they did in that match was actually off the cuff. Everything was off the cuff. They discussed a few things beforehand, but very largely they improvised on the spot, which was very impressive. But they didn't know what to do during the finish. He said that Terry actually, I think, legitimately injured his eye. And he's screaming, "My eye, my eye, my eye," blah, blah, blah. And Jerry's legitimately standing there not knowing what to do. And again, I think Lance Russell or whoever is there saying, what the hell do we do? Where do we go from here, So that was kind of a weird finish. But, Lawler felt uneasy about the whole thing and whatever about the finish, and it was a little odd. But they do bring up bleeding and how bleeding was a big thing in the Memphis territory, specifically Jerry's territory. And he said that, this is kind of gross, but they had the same mat in his Memphis territory forever. They never really thought to change it, which is very disgusting, especially nowadays considering the current circumstances. But even back then, that's still pretty fucking gross. I mean, you have blood on there, sweat, whatever, God knows what else. And they never really changed the mats apparently all that frequently, which is pretty gross. But I appreciate his honesty, if nothing else. But he did want the bleeding here in Memphis to be a staple in the Memphis territories. He wanted that to be a big thing of their promotion. He himself was never a big bleeder, but he was a fan of it and had a lot of his wrestlers do it in their matches. So he also talks a bit about drawing. He actually grew up not wanting to be a pro wrestler, but wanted to be an artist for DC, which is pretty cool. And of course, when I say DC, I don't mean Washington, DC, but obviously DC Comics. So he was a big superhero fan, and he still does that to this day. They actually put up a clip on the WWE YouTube channel about like a week or so ago, a couple of days ago, of Jerry drawing a Batman in under 60 seconds, and it looked great. The guy's a great artist. But that eventually transformed into him drawing wrestlers. And Lance Russell actually asked him to do art for his promotion. It ended up on the air. It was a really, really big deal. So he ended up getting asked to do art for Jackie Fargo's nightclub. And that was how he got into the business. That was how he got his foot into the business, by meeting or running into Jackie Fargo and at his own nightclub, obviously, and running into someone else at that nightclub that helped him kind of start wrestling. So we mentioned how he moved to Ohio at the age of 7, and he was there until 15, and that was when he moved, I think, to Memphis, which is where he grew up mostly, which is why he's a Memphis boy. But even prior to that point, he was a big DJ on the radio. That was one of his things, obviously, before his commentary roots. He had roots in radio as a DJ. And he would plug a show on the radio, like a local show for some dude that said, hey, if you plug my show, I'll either compensate you or have you come into the show. I forgot exactly what he said. But being, in plugging the show on his own radio show and plugging this Renegade Wrestling promotion, he got put in the main event of that show, or one of the shows for that promotion. And that was how he got really into wrestling. So Fargo, and he was still, friendly with Fargo from doing art for his nightclub and whatever. Fargo got wind of this and said, listen, if you stop promoting that clown show, which is a fucking train wreck over there, I'll get you to a better promotion. I'll help you train better. I'll help you get somewhere else better in wrestling if you just stop promoting that clown show over wrestling territory. So then they transitioned into talking about Fargo, saying that he had Stone Cold brings up how Fargo had a swagger about him, he had an attitude about him, and he called him a really good showman. And that was where Lawler really learned a lot of his tricks as to be, and being a master of the crowd and a master of the microphone. And Lawler really praised Fargo for getting fans invested. And that's where he kind of got it from. He actually stole pulling the straps down, like his wrestling singlet and whatever, from Jackie Fargo. I never knew that. And I'm sure he said that somewhere else before, but I've actually never heard that before, I don't think anyway. So I thought that was cool. So he stole that from him. And he also brought up how people hated it so much. It was a great heel tactic. I mean, now people go crazy for it. It's a big wrestling thing. Kurt Angle ended up doing it. I'm not sure if Angle got it from Lawler or Fargo or came up with it himself. I don't know. But Angle eventually did it as well. People hated it so much. A woman legitimately sued Jerry Lawler for pulling his straps down during a match. They made it so far as to go to court, and when the judge got wind of the fact that it was because she was offended that Jerry Lawler pulled his straps down, they basically laughed her out of court. That sounds like something that we would see in 2020, someone being so sensitive, and, in some cases rightfully so. But I could see a Karen or, someone like that, suing someone for legitimately doing something that they don't like. I can only imagine that happening in 2020, not so much in the 80s, but I guess it did happen. It was a funny story. So eventually, Lawler surpassed Fargo as the King of Memphis. He beat Fargo in a match. He went to the back. He was on his way back, and some kid called him, hey, you're the new King of Memphis now. You just beat Jackie Fargo. He was like, oh, okay, so he ran with it. He ended up borrowing the cape and the crown from a wrestler named Bobby Shane. Bobby Shane, I think, was an Australian wrestler. He was flying to Australia, flying back. Either on the way there or on the way back, Bobby Shane actually died in a plane crash. And Jerry still had his stuff. So he ended up keeping the cape and the crown. And that was how he became Jerry, the King Lawler. He was the King of Memphis. But not only was he the King of Memphis, he was also a legitimate king. Not legitimately, but he had the cape and the crown that he got from Bobby Shane. Like, That's crazy. I thought that was a really wild story as well. They talk about fireballs, and he actually learned to throw fireballs from the original Sheik. So Stone Cold asks him, what was the worst incident that you had with throwing fireballs? He had to throw a fireball at Sheik, and Sheik hated the fireballs as much as Jerry did. They were good at them, but they didn't like using them or taking them. Jerry had trouble throwing the fireball, so Sheik had to sell it anyway, and it looked ridiculous. But he botched doing it, Jerry did, so he had to sell it anyway, which was funny. He told another story about how I think he was like working with Savage, and he had the fireball on the desk or whatever, and there was like a little trigger at the bottom that he messed up. He burned off his entire eyebrows. All of his eyebrows, I say all, but he only has 2 eyebrows. All of his facial hair, his beard, his face was scorched. Thankfully not bad enough to burn that guy, but it's still pretty bad. So that happened while he was working with Randy Savage, and that's why you got to be careful with those fireballs. So Austin ends up just throwing names out there that Jerry can comment on, including Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig. And they both called Curt Hennig awesome. Recalls beating him for the AWA Championship back in 1988. Austin throws out Randy Savage's name out there. Lawler mentioned that he actually worked with Savage pre-WWE in Lawler's own territory, and that he was very awesome to work with Savage and his brother Lanny Poffo as well. He had great chemistry, he said, with Bill Dundee, because they never actually really liked each other. There was that legitimate animosity there between Lawler and Bill Dundee that led to them having great matches. And he told a really funny story about how, or even before the funny story, he had mentioned that he actually made Bill Dundee the top star in his promotion because Lawler suffered a leg injury. But then Bill Dundee got pissed at Lawler. I guess this is where the animosity stemmed from. Was that Lawler comes back from the leg injury. He wants to make himself the guy again, the top star. And Bill Dundee doesn't like that very much because he liked being the star while Lawler was away. So Lawler comes back, takes his spot back. Bill Dundee was none too happy, so they eventually feuded in storyline. And they had a big blow-off match where it was a hair versus hair match. And Bill Dundee lost, and the stipulation was not that Bill Dundee had to shave his head, but Dundee's wife had to have her head shaved. So obviously people are thinking that wouldn't actually happen. Obviously Jerry's going to shave his head. Nope, Lawler won. So Bill Dundee's wife shaved her head for a fucking wrestling angle. What a trooper. I thought that was cool. That was when they transitioned into Andy Kaufman. Obviously, the very famous Andy Kaufman story. They talk a lot about Kaufman here. So he mentions how Kaufman called Lawler about coming to Memphis about being a wrestler. Because originally, Kaufman had aspirations probably of working with Vince McMahon Sr. in the WWF, WWF. It was probably WWF at that time. Vince, I guess, had reservations about bringing in actors and the fans resenting him for that and whatever. Just kind of like what we would say today, to be honest with you, which they do anyway. They bring in actors and celebrities to do matches constantly. But Vince Sr. had that reservation about Andy Kaufman way back when. So who knows how that would have went. Had he gone to WWF, would he been able to do all this stuff that he ended up doing in Memphis and wrestling women and talking shit about people and whatever, getting that legit heat from fans? Who knows? I think it really worked for a variety of reasons. Working with Lawler worked, where he was worked, because wrestling fans are wrestling fans, but especially down south, they probably had more of a tendency to believe it was real back then, even more so than people in the north. So they showed that promo, which you've probably seen before, I'm sure it's on YouTube, of Kaufman going off on fans in the Memphis territory about having soap. Wash yourselves, you guys are dirty, you're gross, it's not soap, it's not soap. It's soap. That's what he said. That's how he said it, too. It was a great promo. The guy's such a fucking asshole as a character. Like, he really just got it. There's very few celebrities, I feel, that just get professional wrestling. Andy Kaufman obviously was one of them. The fact that he's not in the WWE Hall of Fame is just beyond my... I can't believe it. It's beyond belief. I know the WWE Hall of Fame doesn't really mean a lot to a lot of people. I get that, but still, I think it would be nice. But nonetheless, so he wanted to make people hate him. He loved that about Buddy Rogers. He grew up idolizing Buddy Rogers, watching wrestling. He wanted to be the guy that people hated. So in order for people to hate him, he wanted to work with women. So we can easily take care of him, beat him in matches, blah, blah, blah. So again, Vince Sr. shot down that idea because he thought fans would resent the company for using an actor, which was interesting. Lawler goes up to Kaufman one day, And he goes, hey, what about wrestling men? And Kaufman said, oh, no, I can't do that. I would get hurt, blah, blah, blah. Insurance as an actor, not as an actor, as a fucking, as a comedian, blah, blah, blah. So Lawler says, no, I don't want to put you with the men. I want to put you with me. And Lawler's thinking, and he obviously admits here in the podcast, he was obviously thinking about helping Kaufman out, but more so helping himself out, because he knew he can get a rub from working with Kaufman. So he goes to Kaufman and says, listen, if you work with me, you need to get your comeuppance at some point. And Kaufman understood that. What if I'm the one to give you your comeuppance? And I won't hurt you, I promise. And we can make a lot of money together. I'm not sure if he told him that, but Lawler is obviously thinking that. So that's what he did. He promised not to hurt him. They went over the match together, relentlessly before it actually happened. So Lawler laid him out with multiple pile drivers, obviously not actually hurting him. But Kaufman really wanted to sell it, so he called for an ambulance. Lawler said, no, they're like $300, dude. I'm not getting an ambulance. So Lawler goes to the back. Kaufman is still in the ring, laid out from the pile drivers. And they relay that information to Kaufman. Kaufman said, I'll pay for it. So he literally paid for a $300 ambulance, which is obviously a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money today. But back then, that's like, well over $1,000? I'm not exactly sure. So he actually paid for the ambulance for the sake of the storyline, for the sake of the angle, which is awesome. So Kaufman never took off the neck brace, and it was months and months and months that they didn't talk, and they were obviously not close, but they were friendly. They didn't hate each other legitimately, but it was months until Lawler heard anything about being on the David Letterman show, and that was Kaufman's idea. So they were told to mostly do it on the fly until they were told to apologize to each other and then, move on. But Kaufman said beforehand, what if you hit me? How would that go over? That wasn't something they ran by anyone else, especially not David Letterman, because David Letterman was shocked as anyone when Lawler hit Kaufman in that segment. So this segment kind of goes off the rails. There's no apology from Kaufman. Lawler has no idea what's going on. So then out of nowhere, as they're about to go to break, and they're probably not going to be brought back because this segment isn't really lighting the world on fire at this point, Lawler just stands up and slaps Kaufman, slaps him right across the face. And there's just this silence comes over the building. Letterman completely no sells it, looks right into the camera. They go to commercial, and no one really knows what to think. So they come back from commercial. Kaufman and Lawler are still there. Kaufman says he's walking off, comes back in a fucking storm of swears. The guy goes off, calls him an asshole, says fuck you, Lawler, all this other shit. The guy goes off on Lawler, and the whole thing was just great television. I'm not a big David Letterman show fan or whatever. I haven't seen every episode, but I would have to imagine in the history books for that show, when you go back and talk about greatest moments, that's got to be one of the early ones because it was so good and it came off so well. It got a lot of buzz for Lawler, Kaufman, the show itself. It was a great moment. It was a really, really good segment. So anyway, everyone was in shock over it. Letterman actually said later on that was one of the first few times, if ever, that he felt like he lost control of his own show. So that was when they transitioned into the Man on the Moon movie that was being filmed, obviously on Andy Kaufman, with Jim Carrey playing Andy Kaufman. Carrey, if you watch the Jim and Andy documentary, which is a great documentary, I watched it on Netflix several years ago, I want to say in late 2017. I doubt it's still there, but it's a really, really good documentary. Lawler is a part of it. I don't think they interviewed Lawler for it, but obviously it's all about Jim Carrey and how he portrayed Andy Kaufman and how he took it way too seriously. And the directors blamed the fact that he got way too much into character acting, but even they didn't really want to work with him. He was a prima donna. He was just taking it way too fucking seriously. And Lawler even said, he does know the fact that me and Andy were friends, right? Behind the scenes, that we were actually friends. We didn't actually hate each other. Jim Carrey apparently didn't get the memo. Didn't get that message. So he acted very hostile towards Lawler during the entire filming of the movie, and Lawler fucking hated it. There was one point Lawler said that he actually fed a line to Jim because he was trying to talk to him, and Jim just completely no-sold him, didn't even talk to him. So Lawler fed him his line, and Jim Carrey freaked out, just flipped out over it. So not the most pleasant experience for Jerry Lawler. He recalls joining the WWF in 1993, and how Jerry Jarrett actually had some control of the company at the time. And I'm actually kind of shocked they brought this up, but I guess it's a part of Jerry's history, that Vince was going through the trials back in the early 90s over the whole steroid thing. He doesn't mention steroids, but he does mention that Vince was in trial and whatever, so we had Jerry Jarrett come in just in case anything went wrong and Vince couldn't run the company anymore. He couldn't run the company. Jerry Jarrett would be there to run things. kind of like what we kind of have with Bruce Pritchard now and Paul Heyman, who's no longer in power, obviously. Like, creatively. They bring these people in as like, oh, yeah, you can help me run the company, but yet they have zero power whatsoever. Maybe it wasn't Jerry Jarrett that I'm thinking of. Maybe it was like someone else. Like J.J. Dillon, I think I'm thinking of from many, many years ago. I don't know about Jerry Jarrett, but he seemed to be an example of that, where he didn't really have much power at all. But Jerry Jarrett wasn't there long. Jerry Jarrett was the connection of bringing in Jerry Lawler soon after. Jerry mentioned that a lot of guys had animosity towards Jerry Lawler, that is. Got to, specify which Jerry I'm talking about here. Because Jerry booked himself to be a top star in his own promotion for so long, people had animosity towards him for that. So someone went so far as to poop in his crown. Legitimately take a shit in one of his crowns. And Jimmy Hart was the one who relayed the message to Jerry about it. Jerry Lawler told Vince about this. Vince told him, he promised him, listen, that's never going to happen again. I'm sorry. Lawler even said, listen, I can leave if you want me to. I don't have to be here. I mean, it's not really a big deal to me. I'll go. Vince is like, no, stay. You're going to stay. I'll make sure it never happens again. And sure enough, it never happened again. So Vince looking out for Jerry. Lawler never really thought about being an announcer, he admits here. He always thought about being a wrestler. It was just kind of something that came naturally to him. So I think the timeline is off here a little bit. Because Lawler came in to WWE. Was he a commentator straight off the bat, or was he always... I don't really remember exactly. But he was like, oh yeah, I had to fill in for Randy Savage, who jumped ship to WCW in 94. I don't remember. Again, I think Savage left in 95, though. No, he was there. I think he left in 94. I don't remember exactly, but maybe it was 93. I don't really remember, but I'd have to go back and think about it. But anyway, his timeline was a little off, but essentially he said that he became a commentator because Randy Savage wasn't there at the tapings. Vince turns on WCW, and Randy Savage is on Nitro. So that would have been 95. That would have been 94. That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, if he's watching WCW... that wouldn't be in 94. That would be in 95. But nonetheless, that's how he became a commentator, he said. And he also talks about his relationship with Vince and with JR and how he's enjoyed working with both of them. He never prepared. Lawler didn't, and that's pretty obvious just from hearing his commentary. But JR always did. JR almost over-prepared sometimes, even going so far as to sit in on production meetings and stuff like that. Lawler could not give two fucks. Austin brings up how Lawler was the soundtrack for many people's childhoods and careers and stuff like that, which is true. He said that Vince actually really liked his style, Jerry's style of commentary, and that he brings up a great point here, how people cared about Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler as commentators because they were stars themselves. Now, they obviously shouldn't overshadow the talent in the ring, of course, but they have to have their own personalities, because if they don't, then no one's going to give a fuck about you, what you're saying, or how much it really means. He brings up a great point, like, oh, Jerry Lawler had credibility before he got to commentary. Randy Savage had credibility, so if he's putting over this guy, then they got to be good. Like, it's that type of thing, JBL had that, not the greatest commentator from a credibility standpoint, though. He had credibility because he was a former WWE champion. So if he's praising this guy or that guy, there's something to what he's saying. You know what I mean? So I could see where he's kind of coming from with that. I thought that was a very good point. He mentions how we got the high-pitched voice because Stone Cold brought that up. Where did you get the high-pitched voice from? The whole, oh, the puppies, oh my God, whatever. He said that he actually got that from Curly of the Three Stooges, and how the puppies thing came from Road Dogg, and they show a montage of Lawler being a perv and whatever, and it is what it is. It was funny back then, not so much in 2020, but back then it was funny. They talk about his first and only ever WrestleMania match, and how Lawler was very happy to get that WrestleMania opportunity, but he thought the match could have been better. He said he will not argue with anyone who says that it's the worst WrestleMania match of all time. He never said, oh, I don't agree with that, it wasn't that bad. He's like, listen, I'll let people speculate for themselves, and I'm surprised he even brought that up, because the match did indeed suck. He does say, though, that he does agree with the masses, and that it would have been a lot better, considering who was involved. You had Jerry Lawler, Michael Cole, Stone Cold, Jack Swagger, among other people involved in that whole thing. Booker T got involved, I think, at one point, maybe towards the end or afterward or whatever. It should have been better than what it was. It was always going to be a shit show, but it should have been better than it was. And Lawler even says that it would have been a lot better had it been shorter. It felt like 30 fucking minutes. Maybe between the intros and the outros and shit like that, it was 30 minutes. The match itself was 13 minutes, which is completely ridiculous. It should have been a 5-minute sprint, Lawler wins, and you move the fuck on. But it wasn't. He does say that he admires Vince's dedication, and he's felt great since the heart attack, which I mentioned at the start of the show. He brings up the Hall of Fame and how he initially didn't want to go into the WWE Hall of Fame because he got the gist that going into the WWE Hall of Fame would mean that he was retired from the ring. And Vince said, no, don't think of it like that. You're only going in as a commentator, not as a wrestler. So hopefully Jerry's not going in again as a wrestler. I would assume it just kind of takes in the whole package, and they only really told Jerry that to make him feel better. I mean, we've seen people before. Kurt Angle went into the Hall of Fame in 2017. He ended up coming back to the ring a couple of months later, so you never say never. Goldberg is a fucking WWE Hall of Famer. He's a former Universal Champion. So again, never say never. It's not like the whole Ric Flair thing, like, oh, he retired in WWE the day after he went into the Hall of Fame, he has to be done. We've seen a handful of guys go into the Hall of Fame and go on to continue to compete. Fucking Bully Ray. They haven't wrestled in WWE since then, but Bully Ray, Bubba Ray, whatever, went into the Hall of Fame in 2018. I think he's gone from Ring of Honor, but I don't remember. But he was still doing stuff with the Ring of Honor years after the fact. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter that he's in the Hall of Fame because he's still wrestling actively in another promotion, granted, but still. Nonetheless, so he talks about the Shatner introduction, and I heard a rumor that he actually wanted someone else, and he didn't really mention that here, I don't think. He just mentioned how they got William Shatner for it, and he got a lot of shit for it. Not Lawler, but Shatner, and Shatner thought there would be a teleprompter, and there wasn't. He was freaking out. It was a great story. So to close it out here, he brings up how he's honored to be taking over WWE Storytime for Mean Gene. His Mean Gene passed away about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago. So Lawler is going to be doing the hosting for the new season of Storytime coming out in the next couple of months, which is cool. He also mentioned how his 50th anniversary show for his 50-year career anniversary is coming up, I think, later this month, if not in a couple weeks, which is cool. So he's going to have a big 50-year anniversary show celebrating 50 years in wrestling. A lot of people are going to be a part of it. Big Papa Pump, Scott Steiner, Sergeant Slaughter, among other people. Doesn't know who he's going to wrestle yet, but it's not going to be a send-off, he assures you. Him and Austin give each other props, and that was the end of the episode. So again, I thought it was a very good episode of Broken Skull Sessions. Jerry Lawler, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Again, like I said, I was skeptical. I said this earlier, but I was skeptical just because I know we've heard these stories before from Lawler. Not all of them, like the Jim Carrey stuff I've heard, the Andy Kaufman stuff I've heard. Obviously, got to touch on that again. But there was enough new information to make it worthwhile, and I enjoyed it overall. I thought it would drag. It was 1 hour and 16 minutes. Flew by like that. Or more like, there we go. More like that. So I would definitely recommend checking it out right now on the WWE Network. Broken Skull Sessions with Jerry the King Lawler. That being said, guys, thank you as always for checking out the video. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Check out the description box down below for the playlist of all the Broken Skull Session reviews I've done here on the channel, including the Undertaker episode, the Kane episode, Goldberg, Big Show, Mark Henry, Bret Hart, among others. So check those out right now here on WWE Network and Chill. Looking forward to the next one. Until next time, guys, I'm Graham G.S. Matthews. Have an awesome one, and I'll catch your ass down the road.